Why is it that every time we see a Black champion do something really great and then we dig into their education, we find out that they have had either a non-traditional or an unconventional education, especially when we're talking about Black athletes or Black stars? We're going to talk about that today on Freedom Friday. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. Well, good morning, friends. It's another Friday. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif El Mekki and our great guest today. Look who's back. It's Ish from Philly.
Guess who's back?
Yes, who's back? Ish from Philly. Welcome, brother. Good to see you.
Always love being here, bro. Love talking to y'all.
I feel like we're a little Philly lopsided this morning, though. You know, a little Philly lopsided.
Listen, it was like that game last night. You know what I mean?
Stop it. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to talk about it. But anyways, you know what our favorite thing to talk about is education. And today, you know, I think we misnamed this show. The show is called Non-Traditional Education and Black Success. But the interesting thing is the thing that we're going to talk about today is actually kind of traditional. It's not non-traditional for Black people to educate themselves or to find unique ways of educating themselves. We thought about this week because of this sister, Coco Gauff, who is a tennis player who has done great things at a very young age. And, you know, for anybody who lived through the Serena and Venus Williams kind of ascension years ago, this has to be like, you know, you get old and you start saying, well, we've seen this before, right? Like, we know what this is, right? But we haven't seen exactly this before. We're starting to see iterations of Black champions that were deliberately made. I just want to put it that way. So we talk about Serena Williams and Venus Williams. Richard Williams had a 78-page plan for getting them out of Compton. People don't talk about this very much. We like to talk about Richard, like, you know, in ways in which we diminish his greatness. This dude had a 78-page plan for how Venus was going to become a champion that far exceeded anything that would be expected of her growing up in Compton. And within that plan, he committed to it. He quit his job as a security guard. He dedicated his time to training these two champions to be champions, and it worked. You guys should Google and go look at this old conversation, this old interview that's being done with Venus Williams and the white reporter, white journalist. It's just, you know, keying in on her. Like, what makes you think that, you know, you could do these great things or whatnot, you know? And, you know, here she is. She's, you know, at this time, there weren't, you know, tennis is very white at this time. There weren't any representation of young Black women in the game. So they were just shorting her. And Richard just came from off camera and basically just like, stop that nonsense, right? She told you she's great, man. What's wrong with you? Why are you asking her these questions? Whatever.
Don't mess up her confidence. I'm building her up. Don't try to take her down.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And this, you know, there's a lot of lessons in that for us as parents and as educators and people who our children are undervalued and under the low expectations for them are a prison for our kids. I'm just going to say it that way. So, you know, I don't need the full screen, but I'll say this much. Coco Gauff now is another iteration of that. And I don't want to make it the Venus Williams story part 2 because she has her own story, right? This is a person who's the youngest person to get as far and advance as far as she did, I believe, in the U.S. Open. At 15 years old, she beat Venus Williams, who was 39 years old at the time. So this is, you know, she's ascending, right? And since then,
dang, I didn't even realize she was 39. Like,
I know.
That means you old.
That means we really old, right? That means we about to
she's 39. That means we. Good Lord. I kind of wish you hadn't told me that. Yeah.
Does that make you feel bad now?
Bruh.
Yeah. No, actually, she's older than that now. That was
when she beat. Well, yeah. So that was 2 years ago, right?
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So let's be real. We're even older than we thought, you know.
Yeah, she's 19 now.
She's 19. Well,
You said
yeah,
Coco's
that's
19,
right.
right?
Yeah,
She be
Coco's
there
19 years
15.
old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's right. She's 19 now.
Wow. Wow.
So everybody listening to this or whatnot, you are welcome to feel old.
Yeah, embrace it. Embrace it.
Embrace it. Just you see the
But it's
gray
still
in your
hard
beard.
watching the kids. People you watch it when they're young, and then you see them and they're gray hair. You're like, wait a minute, if you got gray hair, then it's like watching your students and they grown with, shopping with their own children. And
Well,
you're like,
what
oh,
makes it harder is I don't want to go off topic, but with Venus and Serena Williams they're a little bit ageless and timeless too. When you look at them, right, it's easy for us to freeze them as the young people because they don't look like, sometimes people at their age look like they've hit every kind of bit of bad road. And these two sisters don't. So the last thing I'll say about this is, this is what kind of gave us the idea to have this show today, which is, let me pull it up here so we can see. Let's add to the stage. Coco Gauff celebrates her high school graduation with pictures in Paris.
Nice.
So she's, look at her. She's in front of the Eiffel Tower. She's in Paris at this point because she's about to play in the French Open while she's graduating from high school. She graduated from something called the Florida Flex program, which is a virtual education program throughout the state of Florida. I believe some other states during the pandemic actually contracted with Florida to be able to bring that virtual kind of platform to their states. I believe Washington State actually contracted with the state of Florida because it's, it's widely seen as a good avenue for some people. Like we talk badly about virtual learning and virtual education or whatnot, but in this case, this is what it's used for. So it was very hard for her to finish high school and to do high school, not even finish, to start and do high school. With her schedule, her teachers would be sleeping. When she'd be calling in to get help, and her teachers, she said this, her teachers would be sleeping because, time differences and all that. So anyways, she went to virtual high school. Her mother was her primary educator. Her mother actually quit her job to be her homeschool teacher. And that's how we have this champion, one who has done great things in the world, but also has graduated from high school. Her father also quit his job, so he trained her on the tennis side. Mom trained her on the education side. I'm going to stop there. Think about the implications of two parents saying, "We got this. We got this. This is a young person, young mind, or whatnot." And also, I will just say this: imagine Coco is not in the care of two people that believe her, in her, in the way that these two parents did. Imagine she's in some regular situation that many of our young champions are in, where she's being diminished every day and she has educators who don't believe in her, whatnot. Coco's not an international champion then. Coco is like so many of our children, unearned or unused talent. What we have, we are wasting our kids. Anyway, so I'm going to stop there and say, what do you brothers see in this story and others about unconventional education, not non-traditional, because Black folks have done this before, and the power of unconventional education, Black education?
Go ahead, Ish.
Yeah, no. The first thing that comes to my mind is like they're not being saddled with the toxicity that's too often in our schooling, right? That being supported, having something and some people there with you, telling you that you're great, that whatever lies that you see on television ain't true about you and your people, and also just uplifting that. It's like not having that taint of white supremacy every single day, wearing you down, and then even being taken down the paths and be like, you are a wonderful, capable child, able to do anything that you put your mind to. And too often that is diminished, right? And there's a reason why at fourth grade, they say that the so-called achievement gap starts to happen, right? That children of all races and all ethnicities are kind of on the same path. And then in fourth grade, it just starts to deviate dramatically. And that's because the light has been pushed out too often of our children's eyes before they even have a chance to even fully realize their potential. And so when you have stories like Coco, when you have stories like Venus and Serena, right, and other champions and other folks who have these non-traditional forms of education, you can literally point to the fact that they believe in themselves, that they were ushered into a situation where they were able to realize their potential and not be saddled and with low expectations, like you said. I definitely agree with that. And even just the perception of this society of them, right? They're able to form an identity separate from that. That whatever they're talking, right, whatever noise is outside, that doesn't apply to me because I'm great. Yeah, and that does not happen enough for our children. And we need to be honest about how these school systems are structured. They're structured in a way to reinforce the dominant society's perception and the dominant society's ideology. And that ideology is steeped in anti-Blackness. And if we're not even honest about that, we're already talking about the wrong thing when we're talking about the education of our children.
You know, on that point, do you feel like it is so bad within our system that within our education system that it requires more of us, way more of us, to pull our kids into safe harbor of our own, in the way that Richard Williams did for Venus and Serena, in the way that Coco's parents have done for her, that it's that necessary to completely retreat from the system?
I mean, I do. I don't think it's realistic for a lot of people, in the sense of needing to go to work, needing to pay the bills, not having the luxury to just like quit their jobs. I mean, that's real. And that is a lot of sacrifice that, Serena and Venus's father did. And that's a reality that a lot of people just can't undertake. And let's be honest, a lot of people don't even have that foresight for themselves when they're entering into this situation. I think about myself, like our children, we realized after our first child went to our neighborhood school that we had to take them out and put them in an Afrocentric school so they can have a sense of self. And that has produced a situation where our boys that did that actually more successful academically, are better able to navigate the system, that don't believe the hype when they're in there and can even point out when those problematic things happen in their school buildings. And then our oldest son has struggled as a result of not having that experience at a young age. And that's just real. And we need to be honest and have those various options and ideas when we're doing it. Of course, I wish we can say like, let's all like break away from the system and create something new. But the reality is we're not even at the point of even having that conversation because we're not even speaking the same language. We're not even talking about the implications of what that means and the responsibilities in which that would take and the collective will that would need to actually produce something where more folks would have the ability to do such. And I strongly believe that our children need to be protected, that we need to have these conversations with our children, but we also have to have these conversations as adults with one another. And truth be told, we ain't having these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point is so complicated. There's one thing like, oh, here's a solution, but the path to that solution is real perilous. Look, my oldest son went to a private school called Academy of the Way. We're really blessed to have that. And I remember Mama Elamisha, who's passed on since then and started the school. The pushback she got from our own people, before that, she worked in the Postal Service. And people gave her hell for quitting a good job and starting a school. They're like, what? You leaving that and the pension and this? And you leaving a good job to go do, and she wanted to start a school. I mean, it reminded me of like how my elementary school, Nathan Musasa, started, right? Like families just saying, you know what? Like, no, we need a better alternative for our children. And having the courage. I can't even say having all the resources. Their resources with themselves, their intellect, their brilliance. Not a whole lot of like other resources. They started off in somebody's home, and eventually, grew to a building. Mama Elamisha, and the team that she put together was able to start a school. And the amount of folks, who just pushed Black folks were just like, that's a dumb idea. Like, you know what I mean? You left a good government job, you dummy. You know what I mean? Like that's how so many people are raised, right? Like it's, and some of it is when you just like recognizing it's like the sociological phenomenon. Like, there are people who are raised like in survival mode, but in one way survival mode. Because another way of thinking survival mode, because I would say to people, Mama Elamisha founders of Nidhamu Musasa, Mama Fasad, Baba Jinzi, and Baba Jehudi, and many others, they would also say, look, we're in survival mode, and this is why we're going to educate our own children, right? And so it's just looking at survival in two different ways.
Yeah, I think this is a good point to ask the question, though. Does it have to be unrealistic to do it? And by it, I mean, does it have to be unrealistic to take over this much control over your child's education to the point where, Richard Williams did quit his job in his case. A couple of years ago, I saw a documentary, though, on the growing number of Black people that were homeschooling. And it turns out it wasn't all middle-class people like I would have thought before I watched this. They actually profiled some low-income, mostly moms, who were finding a way to make it work for them too. And I thought, wow, this is different, right? Because usually I think of middle-class people when I think of homeschooling, not just middle class, I think of upper level middle-class people, because it does feel like, my own life, it feels like it would be expensive to do it, right? But I guess that's my question, is maybe two questions here. One, does it have to be unrealistic and expensive to do as much of this as you can? And if you can't do it all the way, like quitting, 100% your jobs to do this full time, what are the tools or the resources for you to be able to virtualize the experience of like homeschooling? Like what could you do if you couldn't just quit your jobs and do what these folks have done?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real question. And like what Sharif was just saying, it's layered and it's complicated, right? Majority of our children still attend public school systems, right? And we can't hide from that reality. And there is a responsibility, right? We just can't totally disconnect ourselves from majority of our folk. And as you were just saying, a lot of people are taking it on their own right now, right? Homeschooling their children. I think of Marcus Klein and the wonderful work that he's doing in Chicago right now, started in a house, right? And then turn it into a school and then producing scientists, right? These are things that folks have always done. It's kind of fugitivity almost within this system. And I guess that's the type of fugitivity that we need to be doing across the board, and recognizing that it's not one size fits all. It's going to be multiple ways and multiple angles in which we have to approach the situation, but we have to be clear on that. And we have to be able to speak on that and then collaborate and collectively work together towards those ends. So like if your child is going to public school and you're listening to this conversation, you're like, there's no way I can do that, right? Maybe you want to take the risk. Maybe you do want to think about virtual, right? Maybe you do want to pursue some type of other form of alternative education, right? But at the end of the day, we also have a responsibility to the folks who aren't. And the responsibility is much larger, and it won't be solved, right? This is like another example of like a temporary survival program. And some people do that by like moving out to the suburbs, sending their children to the best schools, right? I don't know if you saw what happened in Abington the other day with the big brawl and all these folks getting arrested, right? And most of those are our children. And I saw this pastor in the interview talking about, well, we escaped the city and our children come out here and then ruin it for themselves. It's like, ruin what for themselves? The situation did not change. You're just doing temporary survival programs in order to solve a problem that we're not even fully diagnosing correctly, right? We think the problem is just money, right? Or the problem is just succeeding within the very structures in which designed to really maintain oppression of most of our people and are built from that. And so, and unless we're actually even having that conversation with our children and also in the schools, and as also exploring it through primary documents and really being critical of how we're even approaching studying that, then we're not even doing anything except spinning our wheels and only having temporary solutions in certain sections, in certain pockets, right? So we can hold up Coco, but Coco is an anomaly. You understand? Like these stars, these athletes, these are anomalies. And our children are brilliant by default. But you don't put a bird in a cage unless it can fly higher than you. And too many of our children find themselves in that cage and not even knowing it and thinking that the full extent of reaching heights is reaching the top of that cage. And I think that mentality is perpetuated within the very structures of even how we think of what success is within this society. So hopefully I didn't get too deep with that.
No, that's deep. It's deep in the right way. I'll push back on it just a little bit and say this. And Sharif, you could push back on me too, because this is going to be my, this is going to be.
It's your bad take. Let the folks know.
Yeah,
let folks like get comfortable and brace themselves.
This will be my Negro-pean addition to this conversation, which is, first of all, I wouldn't say that Coco or Venus are anomalies. For one reason, because that makes it seem as though they are weird in some way, shape, or form, when actually they're examples of what we actually are, right? They're actually like they're examples of what we actually are. Like so it isn't some weird plant that's been planted somewhere else or whatnot. This is what we all could be if we weren't steeped in the wrong kind of like system. Like if we weren't, like, we're tea bags, we're putting kids in bad water. Of course, it's making bad tea, right? We're steeping them. And if you did that to any child, I don't care whether you're Dutch or Hungarian or Czechoslovakian or whatnot, if we take any of those children from anywhere in the world and, like a tea bag, dip them in bad water, like water with lead in the water, there's going to be bad tea, right? Anyways, that's a that's a wrong analogy, but I just want to say that first part. But the second part to what you said, Ish, about like the kids. I don't know this example that you just gave, but the guy saying the kids came out to the suburbs or came out somewhere and they've ruined it for everybody because of their behavior, their bad behavior. I do think that there's a conversation we will not have and have not been having about behavior. And when we do have that conversation, it goes predictable two different directions. It goes the Uncle Ruckus direction of the, oh my God, all y'all need is just a good ass whipping, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes the other way. It's
a little scary how well you do that voice. It's a little, I always leave with a little unshaken way.
That's the one side, the Uncle Ruckus side. Another side is that boy just needs a hug. And, they're not doing anything wrong, even as they're stealing and, breaking down stores and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So I don't even want to have that conversation because it gets real frustrating for me to even have an honest one. But I will say this about Coco's parents and Richard's parents. They were both very clear about the teabag thing that I was talking about. And they were making sure that Compton wasn't going to get their kids, right? There was a lot going on around them that Richard had to do a lot to make sure did not get in the way of his champions. He was raising two champions, and he wasn't doing it in some easy place to do it, like the suburbs or somewhere where, things are. He was doing it in the middle of a place where it was very hard to keep your children away from the toxic stuff, toxic culture, even of your own people that was going on. And it's the same thing with Coco, right? She was put into a virtual school, a virtual situation. She was shielded from that raises some uncomfortable questions for us, right? Because part of the success of these two groups that I'm talking about, these two families, was actually shielding their kids from the nonsense, not just of the world and of the system, but of the victims of the system and the world around them, which were their own people. So what do y'all say to that, Uncle Ruckus?
Listen, that's real. I mean, listen, my mom used to say, if anybody's going to brainwash my children, it's going to be me. It ain't going to be the joker down the street. It sure ain't gonna be the TV. We ain't hardly have a TV most of the time in our home. She's like, we're not inviting that in. But she was also, they curated our experiences in the world as Black kids. That she said, like, listen, you are, her position was like Black youth are in danger. They're in peril. And the vigilance, and as a kid, I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is an oppressive childhood, But as I got older, like I understood, like, and I'm just like, man, I should be way more vigilant. Like I'm totally failing. If my mother and if my parents were the barometer, I am failing as a parent. Because I'm nowhere near as vigilant as they were, and that I believe I should be, actually, just knowing like what's out there, what's happening. And so, like I just think about and we used to talk about this like detox centers. And I think like, at some point that's not enough. Like, all right, you're like saturated with this like anti-Blackness and this and violence and blah, blah, blah. And then like, all right, now let me come and and wash you off and right now. It's really a matter of like how to have less need to mitigate for trauma, for emotional, spiritual, cultural warfare. Like, just imagine if we didn't have to do that as much. And what could we build, right? Like, what could we actually create if we didn't have to defend so much, and have our defenses. But I think part of the work that they did, making sure that we were in activities, going to different places, visiting internationally, all of that was part of the defense. But it was actually, they were on the offense in so many different ways. They were so proactive about finding things. Oh, this is the experience we're going to do. This is where we're going to go. This is where we're going to be. This is where we're going to have. That creating that type of having that type of orientation, and then two, having the community to do it, because they didn't do it alone. That was like a communal effort to be able to tap in, and it's almost like old school bartering. Like, oh, I'll teach the kids this and you teach the kids that. It was a lot of that going on, almost like child co-op. Back in the day, we used to have co-op stores. Like, they would buy all these oats and create and make granola and then share it around, and they would buy everything in bulk and then pass it. Like, they had these co-op systems when I was growing up. And, I think they also had that co-op mentality for the children. Like, all right, who are our people? Who are our village? And I think virtually you can do that, today as well. But
this
it ain't
is a
easy.
very, very powerful thing you just said there about the curated experience. It seems like, Ish, you were talking about a curated experience when you pulled your kids out, put them in an Afrocentric.
Ish goes to Mississippi every year. Like, every year his kids is in Mississippi. Like, like curated.
No, I'm not trying to do all that. That's curating the wrong thing. That's like giving your kids slavery flashbacks. I'm not trying to do all that, right? Like, there's some ghosts down there that I'm not trying to have. Like, I'm joking. Actually, South, don't come at me, South. I'm just joking. But Ish, like, you're curating the experience when you figure out you got them in a regular system and it's not good for them. So you take them out and put them in an Afrocentric environment. That's one way of curating. And Sharif, your parents, they took you out of the country at one point. You went to school in, Iran and then other places. When you came back, you had Panthers around you. You were in a school that was very much like curating the educational experience. And what you just said, your mom said, right? Like, if anybody's going to brainwash my child, it's going to be me. That requires a lot of curation. And I think I'm just riffing on this because it's sticking with me. I don't do a lot of this. I don't do enough of this curation. I think the lazy curation for many parents, especially after you get to a certain level being middle class, is just you curate by where you move. And you curate by which school you choose.
Kind of like passive way to do.
Yeah, like you figure like it's a cheap, easy way to curate, which is if I move to this area or this neighborhood, that instantly puts my kid into many different situations that they wouldn't be in over here. So it's the lazy kind of curation, right? It's not the being more intentional than that. Part of that is because I'm a laissez-faire parent. Like, I'm trying to let my kids just develop how they're going to develop, and they would develop differently if I had it my way. If I was like really heavy-handed about it, I would be sitting them down, making them do some lessons that they don't want to do right now, right? Like, we having this struggle even with church, right? My kids don't like to wear ironed clothes, and they don't like to wear belts and stuff, and it was stuff that I couldn't even they can argue with me with stuff that I couldn't argue about.
You couldn't even argue. You couldn't even have a thought bubble that was too powerful. You know what I mean?
Stop it. Yeah, if you even had the thought bubble that would be about your head, I don't want to shine my shoes. They would see the thought bubble. Like, what you thinking? So
fix your face.
I'm not doing enough of it. I just think, and this is just me being honest, right? Like, as a parent, is like I have to make this call between being loose and being tight. Like, letting them form the way that they need to form. So my way of curation is to just create the environment to where they grow on their own and they make a lot of the decisions, but it's not as if I didn't do some base level thinking, which was to put them in a context first, where I don't have to do a lot of the massaging of everything around them. But that also could make you lazy. I have a son in high school who last year didn't have a single author of color in his English language all year long in his ELA class, whatever version of ELA he had last year. And it was the AP class and didn't have any African-American authors, right? And that's why I call it lazy curation, because you two just mentioned things where even as though I talk about this every day and talk about this a lot, there's more that I could be doing to curate the experience. Doesn't require me to pull my kids out and homeschool 100% and go all the way in. There's just some things more that I could be doing to virtualize the experience of taking over the homeschooling experience, home education experience with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
No, that, I mean, right there, and I thank you for that vulnerability. That's a real statement, right? And that's how layered and complicated this stuff is. Raising children, nobody, gives you a book and be like, this is how you do it. And then you don't even know how.
And even if you did, you wouldn't be able to do it because every context is so different. Every kid is so different.
And every kid is so different. I was literally going to say that. Like my oldest son, every time he orders a Shirley Temple now, he knows that I know Shirley Temple is a racist. Because like,
Can I have a Shirley Temple? Dad, I got it, Dad. I know. I just like this. I just like the drink.
Let's stop here for a second. I gotta know, how is Shirley Temple?
She was the worst. You never saw those joints?
Yeah, with the black.
It was a black Sambo always, like the black kid. It was almost like a buckwheat. Like it was another version of buckwheat on that joint. You know what I mean?
This is why nobody wants to hang out with y'all.
Of course, like, Shirley, listen, wait. And look, Shirley Temple was what, 4 or 5 years old, but I'm talking about like the
Shirley Temple was a victim. Shirley Temple was a victim. A child abuse victim is what she was.
I bet
you, when racist.
Yeah, it's like she was 4 years old.
I mean, it's kind of like what Chuck D said about Elvis, right? We don't know.
A grown man though.
Folks were with him, and they did a lot of things that are racist. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. I mean, the show was racist.
Yes.
The show was racist.
Yes.
Okay. Our super producers putting it up here. Remembering Shirley Temple requires us to remember her legacy of blackface cinema. I am just going to stick with this is important though. Okay, because what we're talking about today. This is really important. You know why this is important to me? Because this is the type of discussion with your child your school's not going to have, and there are shit now.
Now, she's a child. There are adults in there making
make
decisions.
Herself do this though? But this is a point of good discussion. Like Ish, I love where this started. Like, I'm making fun of it, but you order a Shirley Temple in a restaurant, you don't pay any attention to the backstory or whatnot, and your kid is saying and doing these things where you might have an honest conversation with them. Well, son, you know what's behind that particular drink that you're having. Now, you could do that with everything. Right? Like that could be a full-time job.
This is probably like my brother. My kids be like, wait a minute. We go to the movies with Uncle Mikael. Oh man, I don't know. Like this is gonna be a lesson. We're not gonna be able to see the movie. Like, hey, he teaching. He's like, hey, here's life. I'm gonna give it to you straight, and I'm gonna help you connect all the dots. Even if you're not thinking about it all the time, it's gonna help you navigate. You know what I mean? And so I'm just like, listen, he knows what he's talking about. You know
what? It's hitting me that this is what my father used to do to me years ago. Like, because now that I think about it, like, see, this is probably why I have unresolved trauma, why I'm so laissez-faire with my kids. And
because you had it like intense.
I mean, all the stuff that I loved, I remember in the 70s, there were things that I loved. First of all, if you are of a certain age, you experienced the Star Wars kind of juggernaut. Like with Star Wars back in the day, like they done got boring and, lots of CGI now, and they've changed. But, we were all into Star Wars. That was everything, everywhere, whatnot. And I just remember my father, he was a ish. He was really a ish because, he's like, and he would school you in kind of like a messed up way. He's like, so you like that, huh? So you don't think there's going to be no black people in the future, huh?
Listen.
So you think in space, everybody's white, huh? And that makes sense to you, does it? Does it? And you sitting there like, no. Yeah,
no.
But lightsabers, like.
Listen, bro, this is, and then let me tell you, like, this is how interesting all of this is, and because it's layers of parenting. When I'm talking about like my parents, so even though we went to Nidhamu Sasa, and remember, this was like a community school, like, so every parent wasn't a Black Panther Party member, right? You know what I mean? Like the staff were very, very aligned. But as far as students, it was to serve the community. So communities came from all over.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I thought I froze. It looked like I froze. But
You look
can't hear
like
me.
you froze. Yeah, you
Yeah,
had this look on your face.
I know, like what the hell? All right, but as long as you can hear me. But the interesting part about it was, back then we had those metal lunch boxes. Right? And the metal lunch boxes usually had some. That's so weird. That throbbing.
You're dating yourself. You're dating yourself.
Well, listen, but this is so. Of course, most of those lunch boxes, if not 100%, were white characters from movies, right? Either like some cartoon or white. And I remember as a 4 or 5-year-old, like, can we get that? Can we get a? She's like, nah, we're not. I'm not buying that. You don't need that. Like, and giving me a lesson about why she. And of course, even within the Thamusasa, there were a whole lot of kids with Starsky and Hutch lunchboxes. That's an old cop show, y'all. Chips lunchboxes, Hulk, Spider-Man lunch. And I'm like, man, I'm left out. Like, and this is within the cocoon. So even within that type of revolutionary radical place, because it was serving the community, and community was coming with all types of, like, just frameworks or orientations or whatever, like, we were still standing out in so many ways because, amongst our peers, you know what I mean? The environment was the same, but because of like the, what we were taught at home, what my family's orientation was, and then, what other kids' orientation was, there was still, even then, I'm just like, yo, like, I didn't see Star Wars as a little, like, when it first came out. It was later. It was later when I saw Star Wars. Like, we ain't watching them white people. You know what I'm saying? Like we're not doing. And she used
it was literally white supremacy in space.
Yeah.
Like, it's really like, is this the best future you can think of? This is supposed to be happening in the future in a galaxy far, far away.
She's like, how's that going to help your positive racial identity? And it's like, and here's my thing. Like, I used to love comic books because I had cousins who would collect them. Right. And so I would, anytime we were over their house, I wouldn't like, no, y'all go play. I'm reading. And I used to say, can I get a comic book? And so she's like, why? You don't need made up heroes. We got so many heroes that are real. Why you need a made up hero? Here's a book about, some real heroes. So they actually did stuff. Yeah, it's not imagining, so like that was so like, it formed me, but right. Like it like really, even though as a child, sometimes I would get frustrated. It still shaped my orientation in such a profound way. And I'm so deeply appreciative. But those lessons, man, they be in your ear. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like, I told you at in school one time, kid came in acting like the Fonz. Man, we had a damn assembly program. Yeah, we had an assembly program about how we were not, this was not the environment to be coming in acting like, happy days for those who remember that. Like, like we ain't doing that. You know what I mean? So it was just interesting.
That's real.
That's a big part of the battle. So when we talked earlier about a curated experience, and the story that you're telling right now is that if you are a marginalized parent, meaning you are a minority within the country that you're in, I don't want to get into like an argument about minorities and majorities or whatnot. Any minority, a sexual minority, a racial minority, a gender minority, whatever, in any situation, there's a way in which the dominant culture acts, and there's a way in which the minority culture has to respond to not like be taken over. So these things like the Fonz and Happy Days, for those of you that are of that generation, and Star Wars or whatnot, presented a challenge for many of the African-American families that were trying to raise kids that saw themselves in the first person, not seeing themselves as a sidekick. You mentioned, listen, we really dating ourselves now. You mentioned Starsky and Hutch, right? Starsky and Hutch was a show I used to watch, was these two badass cops and, blah, blah, blah. Everybody on the show's white except for Huggy Bear. Huggy Bear is the black character on there. Now, when you're a child like I was, you're wanting to identify with the black character in a show. So I identified with Huggy Bear. Well, first of all, his name was goddamn Huggy Bear.
I was about to say, that's his name, like Huggy Bear, Starsky and Hutch and Huggy Bear. Like,
and he was like a real jive talking pimp guy. He was a pimp dude, right? So this is who I'm identifying with. So everybody
Oh, he wasn't a cop. He was like the street boy.
Not a cop. No,
he's like the
informant.
He was
an informant.
He was a snitch.
He was a snitch. He was a pimp and a snitch. And he was like, he used to speak like jive, brother. He used to speak like the jive talk. Blah, 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 blah.
Yo, right? Man, I just had spit coming out of my mouth laughing.
So white kids across the country are identifying either with Starsky or Hutch, blonde or brunette. Like that's their choice, right? But they're both cops. They're authority figures. They're good looking. They're
macho,
machismo, macho, all that type of
yeah.
stuff, whatnot. And here I am identifying with goddamn Huggy Bear, right?
I gotta look him up.
So somebody needs to curate my experience.
Yeah. How do you detoxify that? You know what I mean?
And you know, right now, today, it's gotten much better than it's ever been. So my oldest son, who is 33, versus my youngest child now, who is 13, turning 13 this year. The difference between them in terms of what's available, for instance, in streaming world, what's available in TV. I've watched it just in my own lifetime. The browning of these things. There's way more kind of girls of color, for instance, than there ever used to be. Doesn't mean you don't still have to curate. Doesn't mean you still can't flip through Netflix for years and still, you know, have to look for things. You still have to hunt for them. I'm just saying there was a point in which there was nothing. Right. That, like in my case, growing up, there were entire movies without a single person of color in them. Right. Movies that I liked as a child, that I used to have to sneak and go see myself because my father was such a buzzkill on those type of things. Right. Like I used to have to sneak out. I remember I saw E.T. by myself. You know, I had to sneak out and go see E.T. By myself. Now think about that. That's a classic. Right. But I mean, the alien was more prominent than people of color in that movie, right? Like, you know, you can watch that whole movie and forget the fact that, oh, wow, damn, we didn't used to exist, right? I'm making a long point just to say that the curation part of this is what's sticking out to me in this conversation about taking over the education of your children. The mainstream dominant culture is definitely curating what their kids are seeing. They're curating it now with laws. They're passing laws that saying my white child will have none of your critical race stuff, right? My child will not hear anything from your people. And as a matter of fact, neither will you, because we're going to go after AP, African American history too, right? So they're curating not just for themselves, they're curating for our experience too.
Which they've always had. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to literally say which they always had. And even the attack on it right now ignores the fact that it really wasn't really happening in most places or schools or anything. Like people don't know that stuff. And so like when we talk about these curation, and I love how you're putting it, like curating these experiences, right? Because like my children, yes, they go for a week-long camp where they learn security training and do 10-mile hikes and have to like cook their own food and all that. But that's a curated experience that I want for my children. My children are unique because of that. And unique, and what I was saying before about anomaly, I guess that's the wrong term. It's more of like being different than what majority of folks are. And they move different. And
I ain't tell you I submitted their names for child survivor. I ain't tell you that, but now's as good a time as any to bring it up.
Yeah. No, but that's real. And you know, I had to do that for myself. You know, if I didn't read the autobiography of Malcolm X in 4th grade, I would be a completely different person. And I almost got lost in the sauce after that fact, right? But at the same time, when my 7th grade teacher was teaching about Indians, right, and cowboys, I knew he was on some BS. And I would pull his card about it in class, and I would get in trouble for that. And that like led into my whole mentality is like, oh, this thing ain't for me. This thing ain't for us. And our children don't get that early enough, and it's not reinforced. And so when we're even talking about curated experiences now, you know, there's a reason why a white kid in Wyoming that never seen a black person has an idea that black people act this way. And our children internalize that. And that is real. And when we're talking about these curated experiences, if you're literally not purposefully shielding, protecting, preserving your child and putting them in a situation where they're able to even like make sense out of all those things, you're already lost the battle. It doesn't matter. And I think that is so important to like uplift and say, because it is hard to do that. Like anime is one of my greatest enemies right now with my children. Like they want to wear these shirts with these white people on it. They're like, no, they're not white, they're Asian. No, those folks are white. Why does an Asian person have blue eyes and blonde hair? You know, and I literally have to have that conversation. So I guess I'm that annoying father because the older ones are getting to the point where they roll their eyes and be like, Dad, we know white supremacy, I understand, like just like going through those motions with me.
Now, can you move so I can iron my shirt? You know what I
mean? Yes. Exactly. And,
no,
and
I feel you.
Buy it, but they starting to get their own money. So they have like 4 of them white shirts. And it really irks me every time they wear it. I said, every time they wear it, I'm like, why are you wearing that shirt, man, with that white person on it? And but it's real. It is real.
Chris, you muted.
Sorry about that. I was about to say that could be a whole Black parenting discussion and conversation and show in itself, in that you are taking losses sometimes. Your kids are advancing in ways in which they just want to consume some of the things that you see as problematic.
They used to tell me, just let me live. That's what the kids at the school, but I would give it like, bro, El Mekki, sometimes you just gotta let us live, man.
Well, your kid doesn't want to feel weird. Like at school, all their friends are like, for instance, you're talking about anime, all their friends might be engaging in Dragon Ball Z or something like that. You're looking at it like, first of all, this is Asian with blonde hair, like you just said. What show me where the blonde hair, blue eyes characters are, wherever this is coming from. We're seeing that as cultural indoctrination, like mainstreaming cultural indoctrination or whatnot. Our kids are seeing it as, you just don't understand. This is what kids do. This is what all my friends are into.
I just want a lunchbox with Spider-Man on it. You know what I'm saying? I know he's white, but he got a red and blue costume. You know what I mean? Like
part of it,
red and blue, white and red, black and green. You know what I'm saying?
Part of it is developing, not just curating, but developing our own source material. So oh
yeah.
So I'm not gonna like call anybody out. There was a situation. I'm just gonna put it this way. There was a situation where there's a Black author who actually does Black anime, Afrocentric anime, and was in an engagement with a group of people, and some of the Black people in the crowd were saying, why would you make these names or whatnot? These aren't even Afrocentric names, and blah blah blah, and why anime and blah blah blah. And the author says to them, first of all, these names are the literal names of my cousins and family members, so shut up. First of all, let's start there. Second of all, I can show you where anime doesn't just start where you think it starts, and what our kind of connection to this is. And our kids are already listening to this and watching this. That's why I made it, because we needed to make our own source material, because our kids were going to watch the mainstream version of this anyways. So that's why I did this. Now you have 2 or 3 companies that are putting out this Afrocentric anime. They're creating their own source material, and comics. You mentioned you were into comics or whatnot. There are 2 or 3 kind of like comic houses now that are Black led, Black drawn, the whole works and whatnot. That's because there's a market for it, and the market should be us, right? Those of us who don't want to make our kids say, you can't have any like connection to that, but let me offer you a different version of it. Now, not you, Sharif, because I know like Public Enemy put out some graphic novels, and that's probably what you would give your kids, right? But your kids ain't trying to look at that. They're not trying to look at that stuff from 20 years ago.
I did get him Ta-Nehisi Coates' version of Black Panther. I did, and they hang out with me at Uncle Bobby's and all that kind of stuff. So they're it's interesting as they get older. You know what I mean? Like they're not to say lesser, some of it is like they got their own time, money, resources, space, you know what I mean? So, but, it's just interesting to watch them, because now I'll hear them and they'll drop stuff. And remember, they're surrounded. They had my mom up until a few years ago. They got all my siblings. It's 8 of us. They got my dad, right? Like, you know what I mean? So they're saturated in it, at least in the familial sense. And we get the well, this is okay and this is all right, and like there's certain things I'm like, I'm not going to watch it, because it was like, oh, the Little Mermaid. I'm like, we're not watching that crap. Like, I don't care.
Stop,
you know what I mean? Like, that's just on multiple levels. You know what I mean? Like there's probably, in my siblings, there's probably maybe 1 out of 8 who took their kids to see that.
Well, you mean the one with the Black actress?
Yeah.
Oh, stop it.
Just not interested. Just
stop
like
it. Stop it.
And here's my other thing. This is, I don't want to take us too far, but here's my other thing.
Let me just say this. Go ahead, because I'm just going to say we did go because it was a Black actress, and what we tend to do is when there's something like that we think we should support, we go and see it on opening weekend, because the movie studios have this thing about like we don't produce those type of movies because nobody wants to see it, type of thing. But keep going, because even after we did go to do that to support this movie was getting backlash, so we thought we'd go support it. Then when I get there, everything about the story was problematic. But keep going, Sharif. You do your part, because I just
I'm not surprised. I don't even know, because I didn't even follow it. I'm just like, listen, you know, and I didn't hear my mother in the head, but I'm like, now as I'm saying, I'm hearing her voice, like, you know, two things. Like, one, we got our own. Like, there's nothing like actually our stories, right? Like, there's nothing. And my thing is, it's the opposite of blackface. I don't need us to blacken and color every white character and then make it seem like that's progress. Like, you know, even Black Spider-Man, I don't care about Black Spider. Like, I haven't seen it.
Stop it.
I just don't care. I don't want to blacken all these traditional white things and say, look, oh, Annie. Now look, oh, y'all were complaining? Here's a black Annie. Hey, oh, mermaid. Oh, y'all were complaining? Here's a black mermaid. Yo, we have our own folktales. We have our own story. I wish I was more creative and I had resources where I could write this stuff. I'm not a creative. I wish I was, because I'm just like,
you are a creative, brother. For one, you are a creative. And for two, I get the point that you're making, because I partially agree with it. But I will say this much. I've seen all the Annies. And
see, I've never seen any Annies, so that's why it's just like, how the hell?
And going back to the earliest ones, and my daughter has seen.
I read it in the newspaper, Sunday Inquirer, the comics. I used to read the Big Daddy War. I used to read that.
I just had to say this much though: the one with Jamie Foxx is the best one. So maybe I didn't.
Jamie Foxx Andy,
right? And here's the thing: maybe I didn't need them to make that, but then after watching it, it just turns out of all the Annies, the one with the black actress and the one with Jamie Foxx as Daddy Warbucks is actually literally the best one out of all of them, right?
I mean, so I'm not surprised. I mean, it's a dope actor, and it's Annie. Like, why are we recycling white stories for it? Just colorize. I just don't get it.
You know what, Sharif? I'm gonna show you a video right now. That this is what I imagine. This is what it looks like in the Sharif household, right? This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is what it looks like in Sharif El Meki's curated school of home. Hopefully y'all can hear this right now. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Can't hear it yet.
What kind of round are you here now?
380.
What kind of round are you here?
380.
What kind of round are you in now?
45.
What kind of round are you in now?
It's fatter.
22.
Miss Grace, if you want to give jobs to our family and friends, what is that called?
Nepotism.
If you have a bunch of friends who don't do shit, are they an asset or a liability?
A liability.
How many people on the registered sex offender list?
750,000.
Daddy taught you that you were a goddess, so you can never be anybody's what?
Bitch or hoe.
Remove your blindfold. Who is Huey P. Newton?
An African political activist, a revolutionary who belonged to Bob Seale, co-founded the Black Panther Party in 1966.
Who's coming to save you?
Nobody. I have to save myself.
And if I die today, then what's your job?
To pick up where you left off and take care of my siblings.
Good job.
That's ladies and gentlemen, the Sharif El Meki.
I wish I had a younger son. I'd be calling, bro, like, yo, what they call arranged marriages? Like, yo, like, let's talk.
I'm thinking that right now. I got a younger son.
Miss Grace is going to be hard to deal with in the world. I'm just telling you right now.
Bruh, that looks like the beginning of an amazing daughter-in-law. You know what I'm saying?
I love how he has her trained just with the blindfold on to tell you what kind of round he's putting in her hand. He puts a bullet in her hand and she can tell you which one it's for just by feeling it. And then, okay, let's keep moving on. She's just cleaning the gun and taking it apart, putting it back together or whatnot. When I first saw that, I thought, number one, first of all, this ain't gonna come to the Stewart household. And number two, I get the sentiment. I understand it.
You're like, that's too much for me. That's too much.
It's a little bit, there's times
I mean, furthest I'm going, my kid, not the youngest three, the first half, they all took shooting classes. They all, as youth, as teenagers, they all took shooting classes. They, were part of a range. They could, they haven't gone in a while. The boys like really took in, and my oldest daughter. But the high schooler now, she's like, yo, I feel like you've dropped the ball a little bit. A lot of things that you were like so vehemently on,
It
I
goes
was like,
away.
yeah, I'm getting old, baby.
Yeah, that's
Tell
what I
your
was about to
sibling,
say.
you know what I mean? Tell your sibling to take you there. You know what I mean? It was just like chop chop, let's go, boom, boom, boom. Now it's like, whoa, I'm gonna sit by this koi pond today. We ain't going to the
And
range.
don't let your youngest be a girl at that too, by the way. Like as you're getting older and you
Mhm.
have a daughter or whatnot, you know, it's just okay. So listen, I know we're gonna wrap soon because we're coming to an end. There was one part that I didn't get to that I would love to know from you two, which is this entire conversation that we've had. It's been, I think, in a lot of ways about saving the Black mind and doing your job, either as a parent or as a community member, to help know that number one, that's the goal. We have to do that for our kids. And number two, to figure out all the ways we can do it. Like what are our tools? Can you homeschool? Can you if you can't homeschool, what can you do? Can you pick a better school? Can you do hybrid schooling? Two of you have mentioned two Mr. Klein, and I think you said Chicago-ish, who's doing kind of more of a hybrid thing. And Sharif, you put something in our comments around a school that does like hybrid type of learning. So maybe that's a way of which, you know, you don't have to do the whole thing yourself. Freedom schools, there's other ways of doing this, but I want to zero in on one thing as the last part of this particular show, which is both of you are in education, both of you know educators. And if you had to think about if you were not a Black person who's an educator and you're watching this or thinking about this, what would be your advice to them about how they can be assistants or helpers, or knowing that this is the goal, everything we just talked about, like what would they do to actually be allies or co-conspirators, knowing that this is what we want for our children in their daily work as educators, like in their work that they do? How can they listen and watch this and go, okay, now I see what y'all are trying to do with your kids or whatnot. And how can we, you know, help
And you
them
saying
in the rest
non-Black
of the show?
educators?
Yeah, because you know there are going to be educators who are watching this and saying like, this is like listening to somebody, this is like reading somebody else's email. I see what y'all are talking about, but how does it apply to the work that I do every day with the kids that are before me? I have like 35 kids or more in my control every day, and I want to be allies to what you're saying, but this isn't my background, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I would start right there. Make it your background. Like recognize that you've not learned much about actual Black history. You didn't learn it when you were in K-12. You didn't learn it in undergrad. You know, we talk about like the, 96% of teachers being white, like in Pennsylvania and Minnesota and Minneapolis and other places. Well, same thing with college professors. So like who taught you how to teach, and the lessons that they drove from and the history books that they pulled from that you had to purchase, they're grounded in the same stuff that you've been taught your entire life, including TV. So I would say make some of your background is learning what is, and not the TV version, not the social media version, unless you're again curated of who you're following. And I think we had those, some names that you put up there, Chris, on your show a few weeks ago about like these are educators that white people as well as everybody should be following. Right. And so I would say make it part of your background of like unlearning is the most important part sometimes of learning.
I love that. So just, and Ish will come to you, but just to recap, your advice to them, number one, is making it a part of your learning system. Like learn, if you feel like this isn't me, make it you. Like
because you hear so many like, oh, I just don't know. And I like, how many times you gonna say you don't know? You got 100 kids in front. You know, you're middle high school. You got 100 kids. Stop saying you don't know, because you wouldn't accept that from a child. You wouldn't accept that. You'd push and challenge, like, oh no, you're gonna, and this is what the future looks like, and this is what you're gonna have to do. To have that conversation in the damn mirror.
Wow, you sound a little radical, like you're trying to train Miss
little
Grace here. So Ish, would you, same question to you with a little twist of, sometimes a teacher is just dealing with learning how to teach or just teach, period, rather than, conscious teaching. The very first step is just like teaching, period. Like, can you
don't separate them, Chris? Don't separate them.
Okay. Them. All right, listen. All right, don't have your kids shoot me. Damn, I'm just trying to channel the educators.
It's all right, baby. It's all right, baby. Take the blindfold off. It's all right, baby. It's all right.
I'm just trying to channel the educator who may be struggling just a little bit. Like, first of all, let me just back up and just say, this is where I was going with that, was just to say teaching is an easy period, right? Conscious teaching is like a black belt of teaching. but you still have to get through a white belt and all the belts in between, you know, yellow and green and whatever or whatnot. Black belt teaching is when you have reached the pinnacle, I think, of knowing it's more than just delivering content. It's more than just like assessing and teaching a lesson. It's also about knowing who you're teaching and how you're teaching them specific to them. So if you're on a Native American reservation teaching those kids, that's not the same thing as if you're teaching in Scarsdale, or if you're teaching in Harlem, or if you're teaching in, you know, kind of like suburban Minneapolis, right? Know who you're teaching, and that is going to require you to do what Sharif just said. Educate yourself on who you're teaching and what they need specifically. Anyways, I'm not in a classroom, so I'm asking you this question too. Don't be as radical as Sharif, though. Sharif is just like, yeah, everybody should be teaching the right way or whatnot. That's not realistic. That's not realistic. Some of our own people aren't teaching that way, right? Okay. All right. Listen, I'm willing to be wrong.
I can't say I won't be as radical as Sharif.
Okay. Well, let's hear it.
Because, like, literally, I was going to say unlearn too, right? I mean, unlearning is so important. A lot of folks, and I've said this numerous times, right? If you can't acknowledge or admit that Black people are never meant to be free in this society, regardless of your racial identity or ethnicity, or if you're pink with purple polka dots, you hold anti-Black views, because that is what is ingested every single day. And that's really just what's accepted as normal. I think that, number one, you have to always say that, right? You also have to recognize that a lot of folks who go in there aren't going into classrooms with malicious intent. But then at the same time, we have structures that are reinforcing these ideas in teacher preparation programs and this pathology of anti-Blackness. And so when they go into schools, they're participating in menticide. And let's be honest, like, I think of Philadelphia, the average amount of years that a teacher's in the classroom now is 3 to 5 years. I can tell you right now, people don't know how to teach until about 5 years. So, like, we're dealing with like a multi-layered issue right now, where majority of teachers are white women, which, you know, is what it is. But at the same time, there's no purposeful effort to teach them how to actually approach and learn about what it means to talk about what we're talking about. And so, like, I know for the fact that my work in teacher prep programs that I'm involved in, and also professional developments that I've run, I have teachers, white teachers, come up to me afterwards and express, oh, I never knew that before. Thank you. What can I do to look out some more? What can I do? And see that, like, that humble, like, learning thing of really being open. We have to be able to create as many spaces as possible and access points for folks and teachers to access and get it as much as possible, because quite frankly, it isn't happening anywhere really in this country. And even in places where we say it should be happening, it's not. So, like, even when we talk about DEI and multicultural education, a lot of those things and ideas reinforce anti-Blackness, and that is not talked about. So, like, Sylvia Wynter, a great Black Jamaican philosopher, wrote a pamphlet in the 1990s when California was pushing multicultural education, says, do not call us Negroes. And in her whole thing, she's like, this is doing a disservice what needs to be understood, and that is that at the very bottom of all this that will be neglected is Black folks and Black history and Black experiences. And then in a society that's built and maintained from anti-Blackness, you can't imagine something different without those folks understanding that. And that goes the same for the teachers in front of our children. So yes, they're engaging in menticide of our children if they're not purposely going out of their way to learn about these things. Like, if you don't know who Dr. Bobby Wright is and the psychopathic racial personality, if you didn't read that book as an educator, like, you don't know really, like, the psychology of some of the situations that you might be reinforcing and engaging in yourself, right? If you haven't read Amos Wilson, Falsification of African Consciousness, like, all white educators should read that book to get a deeper understanding. So yes, you won't ever be an expert, right? You can't understand the experience, but at the same time, you become a better person as a result of understanding these things. And quite frankly, I don't know if a person can be a good person in this society without knowing those things.
Damn. See, now you said, I'm not going to be less radical than Sharif, and you did not disappoint. I mean, well, damn. So, you know, I'll say this about, you know, just quickly in response to that. So I asked you guys the question to give advice to non-Black educators who do want to do the right thing and do want to teach Black children, specifically in the ways that's therapeutic for Black children, taking into account culture and history and background and what they need as preparation to survive in a world that actually is not going to see the best of them. Where you just went with that, you added some things that, well, here are some background resources that people should study and should know. First of all, you should unlearn things that you have been taught that actually are damaging to the children that you're teaching. And second, beyond that, you should start learning the things that are going the opposite direction, going into the positive direction of what you need to know to be a faithful and good, educator for the educator that they deserve and that they need. But as you started listing some of the things that they should read, Amos Wilson and others, some of that gets really deep. And what I will say to you about that is many of our own educators who we assume share the culture of our students who really don't. Let's just start with the fact that there is a massive class difference between the college educated people who are teaching our children and our children, right? Like there is a massive, so class internally, like we let a lot of our people off the hook with this because we don't go after class. And in some ways, class makes you as white as the whitest white person, right? In terms of an educator for our kids or whatnot. So in terms of reading Amos Wilson, for instance, that's where I started thinking this. That is such a deep, piece of literature, body of work that I agree with you is people should read it and understand, but many of our own people that haven't. Like, I'd just be real cool with you. There are books that you and I share in common. Sharif, especially you and I have had this conversation multiple times over, like, did you read book A and book, and it's just taken as a given that we have some of these books, but it's not uncommon for us to bump into people. Oh yeah, I never read that one, whatever.
Never heard of that.
Never even heard of it, right? So anyways, I just want to say for everybody who's an educator listening, none of y'all really get off the hook. Chris Emden's book about for white teachers that want to teach in the hood, parenthetically, the title of that book was also for the rest of y'all too. And I think we need to start talking about the fact that most of our educators are not prepared. Nothing against them, no offense to them. Most of them are not prepared to be the teachers that our kids deserve. And the reason that they're not prepared to be the teachers our kids deserve is probably from what I said earlier. Teaching by itself, without the additional kind of lens of needing to teach kids at a high cultural competence level, just teaching by itself, the nuts and bolts of that is hard. It's its own difficult kind of thing to do. And because of that, you can say, well, I'm concentrating most of my time just in being a good teacher. Sharif, I take what you just gave me as a challenge to that but that's still bad teaching then. You're not even teaching the nuts and bolts if you're not, considering cultural competency to be a big part of that. You know more than I do. You run a school ish. You are a teacher, a literal teacher, educating in a classroom. Me, from seeing this from the outside in and just thinking about what it takes, if I didn't have to think about any cultural competence to lead a classroom and to teach kids like math or algebra or anything, to me, in my kind of not knowing all that goes into it, it just feels like it's an additional level to now do that from a point of cultural competence too.
Yeah, well, and I hear you. I hear the tension that you're describing, but let me share it a little different way. Imagine if your kid's teacher is a new teacher. They say like, "Hey, I'll look at your kid as a full human being after I learn how to teach." How does that land?
See, when you put it that way,
because that's what we're talking about when we say cultural proficiency. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not like, oh, you get to a black belt, now you're culturally proficient. Because even as Ish described, it's actually a continuum. I can be culturally proficient with one child and culturally destructive with a child sitting right next to them.
Okay, wait a second. Okay, so this always happens at the end of a show. But let me just you're giving me a lot to chew on. But I'm the ruckus of the show, so I have to like push back on this, right? So this nonsense that you're spouting at me and whatnot. Let's say that I went to Vanderbilt and I'm a black teacher and I get a Vanderbilt education, teacher preparation, and I'm ready to teach. And then I get sent to the suburbs where I'm teaching mostly white kids, right? Now, first of all, point of history for people to know. After Brown in 1954, the Black teachers who were kept in those districts had to write a letter to all the white parents asking for permission to teach their kids. This is just a historical point that I want to add to this or whatnot. And the white parents had to agree to it, or the Black teachers would be fired. They weren't integrated with everybody else. The students were integrated, the Black teachers weren't. In Kansas City,
because the money was attached to those kids, right? That's your new.
Well, no, it's even worse than that. It's like, if you're going to make us integrate, doesn't mean we have to integrate your Black teachers into our white schools. And in Kansas, where this was, where board came from, many of the Black teachers did not get the permission from the white parents to keep teaching their children or whatnot. Anyway,
I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying like they accepted the kids because there was Title I dollars. There was funding attached to that kid. So when you saw,
they barely accepted the kids. They barely accepted the kids.
I'm shut it down. Like, keep your money.
But this is the ruckus point I was about to say to you, though, is that Vanderbilt Black teacher, Black educator who gets sent to teach white kids in the suburbs. Did that Black educator do a lot of thinking about white children's background and culture, and teaching, like, I'm a math teacher.
If they grew up in America, Chris, they absolutely did.
No, don't do
they
that.
absolutely
Don't do that.
You're surrounded by it. You're taught about how to take care of white people from the time you start looking at Shirley Temple.
No, I'm not.
Precious Shirley Temple with her frilly dresses and her curled hair, and like, you understand that, oh, she's special. You better show up in that school after your Vanderbilt, and in Vanderbilt they also taught that to you. Like, trust.
No. No, I don't buy it. I look at white kids sometimes, and it takes a little bit of learning for me to understand all of what's going on there.
That's kids in general.
I gotta look at them. If you gave me 35 of them in a classroom, I would have some work to do to understand what they got going on. They got different going on, right? And
listen, you should always bring a level of humility and learning. But in general, there's one group that everyone is taught about. There's one set of history that everyone's taught about. There's one group of heroes that everyone's taught about. And everyone else is just like, if we give
anti-whiteness, Sharif. Anti-whiteness, Sharif. I don't know why you gotta turn this into anti-whiteness. I'm gonna start the National Association of White People or something like that. I don't know. I'm joking, but what I'm saying,
you mean one more? You mean one more? Another one. We got tons of those.
I thought that's called the White House.
This is true. I'm just saying. I was trying to be provocative and say that I don't know that this is just the thing about teaching white teachers to be able to teach non-white people, because I think you can have a Chicano in LA who could be as problematic in a mostly Black school, and a Black teacher going out to the suburbs could be equally as problematic in some ways with those kids. I just think that this could cut a lot of different directions if you're putting college educated middle class people in the classrooms with other people's children and expecting that there's some sort of psychic connection between them two, right?
No, and absolutely. And don't forget, cultural proficiency doesn't mean this is not for even a class, the middle class Black teacher teaching low economic status Black children doesn't mean that they don't need cultural proficiency. Cultural proficiency is not for one group of people. It is for everyone.
Yeah.
But it stands the fact that 80% of the teachers are white, teaching mostly non-white students, right? And so that it's
now, by the way, mostly poor. We crossed that threshold. So the majority of American public school students now qualify for either reduced or free lunch. So
right. So but cultural proficiency for everyone. And when we start with our high school kids, we are cultural proficient. Those competencies are embedded in how we are talking to our teacher apprentices. It's not just for, hey, this is just for white teachers. No, this is for all of us. We should all be thinking about what's culturally destructive and what's culturally proficiency.
Yeah. So for my teachers of color who just listen to what Sharif just said, because some of y'all be listening to these discussions and you think to yourself, give it to them white teachers.
Get them.
And meanwhile, you're like, well, no, I don't know about some of this myself. But but you're getting a free pass, and you shouldn't be getting a free pass. So, So I know I asked you guys as we wrap. This will be the point that I had. I asked you both, what would you say to those educators? I think the advice that you have given them actually is really straightforward. Unlearn the damaging parts of your work and relearn or learn the parts of it that make you the educators that students deserve. The part that I will add to this is about the materials that we're putting before our kids. We talked a lot about curating education. Sharif and I have talked about this in a previous show. I think we maybe even talked about this in a previous show. The books and the literature and the stuff that we are putting before our kids actually is a form of forming their worldviews. It is a form of indoctrination of sorts. It is a choice, what you choose. So right now we're talking about book bans, and we're talking about what we should take out of libraries and school libraries. And there's a fight to be had there, because much of what we're talking about pulling out is are things that are from underrepresented groups. We're talking about pulling out Black authors, Black books, LGBTQ kind of representation, literature for children, things where people with different family structures and people with disabilities are displayed. Those are the things that are mostly being targeted. And here's the problem with that. We're already starting from a bad vantage point in terms of representation of what we put in our kids' hands. We here have all three talked about how we have had to be more selective about the shows that we allow our kids to watch, the books, finding graphic novels with their own representation in it. This is like what you're seeing on the screen right now is about diversity in books. This is a few years old, 2018, but they do this every year and they update it. And this just talks about what children are likely to encounter in children's literature. 50% white characters, 27%, the next largest group of characters that kids will see will be animals. Sharif has said previously that, a child is more likely to see a dump truck than a Black character in much of the literature. They'll see 10% African Americans, 7% Asian Americans, 5% Latina, and 1% Native American First Nation students representation. So this is the first part. If I'm an educator or a person in school or whatnot, and I'm not saying anything, I'm not fighting the literature battle and the book battle and the library battle, and I'm not supporting librarians right now who are trying to keep things diverse, and I'm not fighting state laws that are allowing kind of the Ku Klux Karens to go in and remove our books from the libraries or whatnot. Then this is Chris's advice. This is the part I'm saying you're not holding up your end of the educator bargain for fighting, because the first people that should be on the front line of defense of making sure our kids are getting the books and the literature that they need are librarians and educators, right? And there are so many. There are 3 million educators in the United States. If all of them were speaking with a loud voice about defending the canon, there's a problem if you're not doing that. This is just my one thing. The other stuff we talked about is about teaching. I get it, but this is my one thing, because I believe that books in some ways saved my lives in a lot of ways. And I looked for ones that resonated with me. And this is how I got a good part of my education. I'll say that the Education Trust, and I'll end with this, more recently, as of this month, actually put out a report about the alarming number of negative stereotypes about underrepresented people in the books and in the curriculum. So as we are talking about book bans and all that stuff, and we're not doing enough to hold up our end of the bargain, we're getting our asses handed to us. I just want to be very clear. We're getting our clock cleaned on that particular fight. It gets even worse than that. There are serious. Not only are we underrepresented, but when we are represented, that's what's found in this report from EdTrust. Even when we are represented, it's one-dimensional characters who are either the Huggy Bear, as we talked about earlier, or whatnot. So even when we are represented, Ish said something just a few minutes ago that I thought was pretty profound, which is even when we're doing multicultural and DEI stuff and we're thinking we're doing the right thing, we're still getting it wrong in a lot of ways, and there's a lot to learn, right? So this is my piece of it. I appreciate you, brothers. This has been another good discussion. Did I cut you off? Did you have a last word here?
My last word, I have to hop. Matter of fact, but what I would say is, shout out to the Black authors. Very few authors. Some of the books that even have Black characters are actually white authors. So that's not even the number of Black authors. But shout out to the Black authors, particularly of children books. Got to shout out Fatima El-Mekki, who has several of them. Really geared towards Black youth and Black children. So another great episode.
Okay, I know I hate to do this to y'all at the very
Oh.
end, but this comment just came in
I saw
that
that.
says, "Why so much emphasis on race, culture, and politics in the classroom when kids aren't learning the basics?"
You know what? Because that's actually what's impeding the basics. If I come in there and I'm not culturally aware and I have low expectations and I'm teaching you, it's basically like our teachers used to tell us, like, you know what, the fact that they teach people that Tarzan came to Africa and taught Black people how to live in Africa, like that's the kind of thing that's actually taught in classrooms in a different way. And you're already telling kids your people haven't contributed anything to history, to civilization. At best, you're a stowaway to this to society and civilization. How am I going to be the best? How's that an optimal learning environment? So that's what I know. I got to hop, but we could go deep into
We'll
this.
come
But we
back
got
to
a
this
lot of
one.
folks. We got a
Yes.
lot of folks with that kind of mentality.
Yeah, and I just want real quick, because this is some nonsense for me, man. That is not even being done. This idea that race and all this is actually being done in classrooms, and it has been being done, is nonsense. Even just scratching the surface and then talking about it publicly is causing this type of backlash, and the work hasn't even really started on the most part. So this idea that we're focusing on race and culture and politics in the classroom while our students are not learning the basics, that's nonsense. That is not happening on a scale enough for that to even be a claim. The reality is our kids aren't learning the basics because folks who are teaching them don't know how to teach them. And that's for real.
Well, we're going to come back and we're going to have this discussion again on a future show. And Ish, you should come back again. You should stick with us, brother. You should come back because you add a lot to this show.
Yeah,
so we want you back again. You know, the follow-up comment that this is from Musaya one, who made that previous comment, and the new comment that he just put in was, this wasn't the case in the 60s. We were thriving just fine. And what I will want to say to that is, I don't know where you were in the 60s or in the 70s, but we were far more of a hotbed of kind of like this cultural, Black nationalist, whatever, beginning to infiltrate regular schools because there was an outbreak of kind of consciousness on these things. So I just want to say maybe this is a thing of geography. Maybe where you were, the schools were not having race and culture kind of have a large impact. But I know I grew up in the 70s, in my early school years, and was a kid in the 80s, and this was definitely in the part of the education. So anyways, we will pick this up on a future show. Thank you all for leaving your comments and for adding to the discussion, and for keeping us honest and probing us on things, and adding resources to the discussion too. That's what this is. It's a discussion, and we should have it every week. We are trying to be free. We are trying to, education has one purpose for us right now. It is liberation, right? And if it's not for that, it's not education. So these conversations that we have are to, create a joint understanding of what we need to do, what we need to be thinking, what we need to read, what we need to pay attention to liberate ourselves. As always, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you're freer than you were when we started this show. Come back next week and we will have another episode for you. We appreciate you so much. Share the show.